This is a chat with Tom Wilkie, CTO of Grafana Labs, a startup focused on delivering observability solutions. Now valued at over $6 billion, Grafana has experienced incredible growth in the past 6 years, following their acquisition of Kausal, a SaaS business started by Tom and his business partner. After graduating from the University of Cambridge, Tom experimented with entrepreneurship, working on open source projects, and working at Google. In this conversation, we explore Tom's journey, maintaining a healthy company culture, the future of observability, and lots more. Enjoy!
Okay.
I noticed you have some 3D printers in the background. And I recently bought myself a 3D printer, the Ender 2 Pro.
Okay, yeah.
And just wondering, what's your favorite 3D printer?
I'm a big Prusa fan. So I think the first 3D printer I built, this was 15 years ago, no, maybe 10 years ago. No, 15 years ago, yeah. The first 3D printer I built was a clone of the Prusa Mendel. Prusa's a guy in Czech Republic who does open source 3D printers. And then he obviously started a 3D printer company and it became quite successful. So two of the ones you see behind me, the Mini and the Mark 4S, are both like Prusa printers. I've also got the XL, their big like 5 tool head printer sitting next to me as well. And so like, I like the fact that they're open source and hackable, even though I don't actually do a huge amount of hacking on them. But also like, you can tell I've got a lot of Lego behind me as well. Like I like building things, and the Prusa printers can come as a kit, right? So you get the kit and I spend, 8 hours on my weekend putting it together, and I find that hugely rewarding. So yeah, I like the 3D printers. I will say like my hobby used to be building and repairing and running 3D printers and like improving them. And more recently, it's been using them to do other things. So I've been developing a 3D printed desktop wind tunnel to put little model cars in, and developing it in CAD and printing it. And that's what's printing at the moment. And like my desk is strewn with parts from the CAD models of the 3D printed wind tunnel that I've been developing. I've been doing that project for about 9 months. I think I'm on version 5. And I tend to like print one, get it all working, and then think of like 20 ways in which I can improve it. And so I give that one away. Often at one of like our Grafana events, like I gave one away at KubeCon.
I saw on Twitter you were giving away your models. Yeah, it's really exciting because I'm a big F1 fan, so it's really cool to see. Yeah.
Which team do you support?
McLaren. I've got my
fantastic.
McLaren gilet on. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah. I'm a huge McLaren fan. I have been. My brother is a Formula 1 designer.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, he's currently at Alpine, but he started his career at McLaren, and so I follow whatever team he's at the moment. But yeah, huge F1 fan. There's actually a 3D printed F1 car behind me, a couple of them, and on that 3D printer is the front wing off a Formula 1 car as well. Like, and yeah, normally go to 1 or 2 races a year as well. Like I'm a huge F1 fan, but don't get to see as many races as I would have liked to this past year.
Yeah, actually, I heard about your Big Tent podcast. I listened to the episode where you got the 3D printing guys on, and in that you mentioned that since now you're chief technical officer, you don't really do as much hands-on engineering as you'd like, or maybe as you used to. So I just wanted to ask about if you could talk about how your role has evolved over the years as you've sort of done different things, I suppose.
Of course, yeah, no. So I've been at Grafana Labs now just over 7 years, I think. I joined when the company was about 25 people, and they bought my startup. So David, my co-founder, and I had a small company called Kausal, which was doing hosted Prometheus. We met I knew quite a few of the engineers at Grafana Labs already because of like my involvement in the Prometheus community and their involvement in the Prometheus community. And I remember like Carl kind of tapped me on the shoulder at DockerCon in Austin like 8 years ago and was like, come and meet my boss. And I hit it off with CEO of Grafana Labs, Raj, now my boss. Yeah. And so, yeah, I joined Grafana Labs when it was a small company through an acquisition. But back then I was really an IC, right? Like an individual contributor. I was building and running our hosted Prometheus service that formed a large part of Grafana Cloud. And I loved that, right? That was fabulous because like I got to work closely with customers. I remember signing our first big kind of 6-figure customer on our hosted Prometheus platform, and they're still with us today. And doing a hell of a lot of work on the platform to make it fast enough and performant enough and reliable enough for them to sign such a big deal. It's really engaging. And that was kind of, maybe 6 years ago, the last kind of serious bit of engineering that I did was like all the query parallelization and caching work that happened in Cortex now Mimir. And then, then my, as that part of Grafana Labs became successful, we had to start recruiting and building out a team, right? So I slowly hired kind of, 7 or 8 people to form what was originally the Cortex team. And then we launched Loki and it became the databases team. And more over time, my role transitioned to becoming like a manager, a first line manager, right? And so I think at one point I had like 30 reports. I know that's ridiculous, but like, that's how we roll at Grafana Labs. We tend to have large teams and managers tend to be spread pretty thinly, but I personally think that's quite healthy. And it was really during that time that I transitioned away from doing coding. Like I can remember Gotham, who was, I think, the first recruit. He's another Prometheus maintainer. Works on Prometheus and OpenTelemetry and a whole bunch of other stuff at Grafana Labs. He was the first chap I hired personally into Grafana Labs shortly after I joined. And I remember he had to stage an intervention to like remove me from the on-call rotas because like I was so busy being a manager, doing the managery stuff that like I wasn't really doing my on-call role properly. I wasn't doing the right level of follow-up and I wasn't fixing the problems I encountered. And generally I was making it worse for the rest of the team. People used to dread being on call like in the 12-hour rotation opposite to mine because they'd have to fix all the problems that Tom didn't get around to fixing during his shift. So they staged a bit of an intervention and took me off on call. I mean, that was probably 5 years ago now, or 4 or 5 years ago. And that's really kind of the watershed moment, I guess, when I became more and more of a manager. And then like the founders of Grafana Labs asked me to build out what was originally the Grafana Cloud team. And so I kind of brought together platform and like, cloud specific solutions we were building and databases and a few other things under one roof. And that's when I started managing managers at this point now. Which is another different skill set altogether, to be very clear. And then, now about 2 years ago, the founders asked me to be CTO and bring all of engineering in Grafana Labs under one roof and kind of like help, bring a more consistent culture and approach to how we build software at Grafana Labs across all of our solutions and products. Now really don't get any time to write code. Mostly spend time in Google Docs and spreadsheets and talking to customers, working with our investors and press and the community and so on. Now, don't get me wrong, I love my job. It's incredibly rewarding and engaging. I do miss coding though, of course I do. I still think of myself as a software engineer. It's telling, right? When you go to like immigration in a country that you're visiting and they ask you what you do for a profession, that's what you really think you do for a profession, right? I still say I'm a software engineer at immigration. And so I get my escape at in the evenings and weekends. I work a lot on home automation. So I have a huge Home Assistant install in my house and I've developed a lot of custom integrations for that and a lot of custom work to integrate that with some weird and wonderful technology in my house. I've got these automated shutters that open and close in the bedroom and there was no integration. So I built one. And this kind of stuff, right? And that's where I've been mostly playing with the new AI tools as well, like Cursor and this new one Warp that I'm particularly enjoying. And it's making it fun to be an engineer again, fun to be a coder again. So I get my releases in other ways, and also through the 3D printing, doing a lot of CAD design, like the electronics inside the wind tunnel. I designed them all myself, and they're all running ESP Home, and a fair amount of custom code to do all of the lighting and fan control and weight scale measurements. I can measure the downforce on a little Model F1 car. And so I get my engineering fix elsewhere, but also it's not fair on the engineers in my team to have the CTO contributing code, in my opinion. You shouldn't be competing for the most interesting projects with your team, with people that work for you. That's not fair. But also let's face it, if there's a problem in the code I write and I'm in the middle of the Atlantic on a plane, I can't fix it, right? I can't be there to be on call and be responsible. And we have a very strong culture of responsibility and accountability for the code you write. We tend to say, at least once a day, you build it, you run it at Grafana Labs, right? And it's not fair if I can build stuff but not be on the hook for running it. So that's really why I don't write code.
Yeah, I think your culture, from my perspective, seems really interesting, because even when you go to your website and you go to the My Team page, it has the 15 random people that pop up every time, and I just think that's really cool. And when we talked to Amanda last week, she said that in open source, the main things that matter are the work you output, and also your behavior. So as long as you're not disruptive and you're helpful and all of that stuff. And we discussed how it would be great if like companies could adopt this culture, but it seems to me that partially because Grafana is a lot of it is open source. It seems that Grafana does have this culture. Is
100%,
like,
yeah. And very intentional as well. Like, you know, we sat down, I think when I was starting to build the cloud org at Grafana Labs, it doesn't exist anymore, but like what we were calling the cloud org, I sat down with the other two technical co-founders and tried to agree on the kind of engineering culture we wanted to build so that the teams we were building wouldn't be too different in how we worked. And, you know, one of the things we could all agree on very easily is like, we want to build our internal culture in the same way that you build an open source project, right? So, you know, remote only at Grafana Labs, or we don't have any offices, right? We hire people in, I mean, we've got engineers in 50 different countries. Like a good open source project, like the talent isn't all concentrated in London or San Francisco, right? It's spread all evenly throughout the world. And similarly, like we are incredibly transparent as an organization, because again, in an open source culture, you can't rely on, you know, hierarchy and synchronous communication. You have to be incredibly transparent, allow people to make their own decisions, be autonomous, and rely on very asynchronous forms of communication, like very, you know, written communication, recorded sessions, all these kind of things, like design docs. You have to do that because, you know, in 50, we're in almost every time zone. I think we're in every time zone, in fact. Like, you cannot have a meeting with the entire team at Grafana Labs. Like, you just can't, right? Like, half of them are asleep at any one time. So like we actively try and build our internal engineering organization in the same way that you know, popular open source projects like the kernel and Kubernetes and so on are run, right? And it was a very intentional decision. Also, like, it does obviously help. Two things really help, right? And like, one is like 90% of what we do is open source, right? We're very intentful and thoughtful about what we keep as commercial differentiation, and it's minimal. But it's just enough to build like a highly successful commercial organization, like, which we are, to be very clear. We're not a charity, we're not a foundation, we are a company designed to make money, like, and we're not ashamed of that. Like, the second thing that helps is we build tools for other software engineers, right? So the ability for an individual software engineer to make informed decisions about what our customers need is high, right? Because they can very easily relate to, you know, the customer needs, because they are, you know, we're probably the biggest user of our own tools, right? And most of the new technology and products that we produce come from internal problems, like, that we've tried to solve, right? We're trying to scratch our own itch primarily, and then we turn those solutions into products. And that does make our job easier. Like, I don't know how you'd have this kind of culture in other industries, like, that aren't building tools for software engineers. Like, that's definitely like a harder problem for sure. I don't think it's intractable, but like, it's definitely harder. But like, yeah, we by choosing to build observability tools, and I will also say, like, this is the reason I chose to build observability tools as well. Like, my first startup a long time ago worked on Cassandra, on the distributed database. And let's face it, like, as a small, like, 30-person tech company in London, we did not need a big data database. Like, we had no idea what people use this stuff for. Like, so we had to, you know, so it's so hard to really get to know what customers needed and why they needed it. That it really slows down, like, you know, the iteration cycles and the search and the hunt for product market fit. And so, yeah, like, I intentionally, when doing my next startup, you know, what was it, 9 years ago, was trying to find a problem where those feedback loops and those iteration cycles could be really small, and where I personally could heavily empathize with the target customer and understand them. And so, yeah, of course, we were going to build software for other software engineers.
Just to quickly follow up on that, as the company has grown and accepted outside investment, do you think there's been any challenge to maintaining the culture, or do you think that, given the core belief of the company, it still remained the same?
I don't. I mean, there's huge challenges to constantly maintain the culture, but I'm not sure they're related to taking investment, right? One of the things that that Grafana Labs, and this has got nothing to do with me, the founders have done a fantastic job of managing, like, the finances of the company, right? So we've always been just barely profitable or just slightly under profitability as a company, right? And we didn't take any institutional investment. I don't know the exact details because the timelines are fuzzy, but like, I think for like the first 5 years of the company, we didn't take any institutional investment, right? And so that put us in a pretty different position to most other companies when, in our relationship with our investors. We have a fantastic relationship with our investors, but it's not the traditional VC startup relationship. That it's not the same as the relationship I had in my first startup, where like the investors, very quickly gained majority control of the company, and were not particularly, we weren't commercially successful as Grafana Labs was. So like, it's not really, I don't think, got a huge amount to do with the investors. Like honestly, my experience with our investors are that they treat us, the R&D group, as the experts, and we know what we should be doing and what we should be building, and they trust us to get on with it, right? The challenge to maintaining culture is just scale, right? Like, as it was relatively easy to have like a autonomous, empowered kind of asynchronous culture when we were a small team, right? Because as a leader, you knew everyone and you trusted everyone, right? But as the team gets bigger, like I've got 550 engineers in my team. Like, I try my best to know everyone, but it's impossible to even know everyone's name and face, right? Like, and when you don't know someone, it's very hard to trust them with like the keys to your baby, right? Like, it's very hard to say, just do what you think's right. Like, and you feel the natural human tendency to like want to double check or want to tell them what you think they should be doing. And you got to fight that, right? Because the minute, you come in as a CTO, they don't know you, they don't know, hopefully, that you're, they don't know that you're a real human being, perhaps, like that, like you have thoughts and feelings and opinions on what people should be doing. Like, you have to be careful what you kind of, if you say, I think you should do this, and you're their boss's boss, like they're going to take that as an order, not as a open invitation to challenge you and to question and to debate what the right thing to do is, which is how it's intended, right? So you just have to be careful. Like, and I have definitely found like my ability to influence the team as it's got bigger has diminished, right? That's not a bad thing. Like, one of the things I think I've had to accept is I'm not always right. Like, I make mistakes, and sometimes I'm like, I think we should do this. Like, famously, there was an example a couple of years ago. We were building a bespoke kind of Kubernetes monitoring solution in Grafana Cloud, and I was very, very keen that this just be a collection of curated, interconnected dashboards, right? Primarily because I built the first version of it, and it was a collection of curated, dashboards, and I thought that would be the way, we could be most efficient. We could leverage the investment from the rest of the organization in building, in this fantastic dashboard engine that is Grafana. We could churn out like features and capabilities very quickly. And the team felt very strongly that they wanted to build a React app that we were going to embed in Grafana, and that they could deliver a better experience for the users and a richer experience for the users, and actually move more quickly if they did that, because they'd have fewer dependencies. And I disagreed. Team did it anyway, and they were right, it turns out. Like, and our Kubernetes experience in Grafana Cloud is fantastic. It's one of the best things we built. Like, and so like recognizing that I'm not always right has been a big part of growing up in leadership, and also like a big part of enabling the culture to continue this like culture of empowered engineers making their own decisions, because like they're free to challenge leadership, and leadership also know sometimes not to share an opinion, because it comes with a heavy amount of kind of implicit kind of weight to it.
Yeah, I think Jeff Bezos says in Amazon meetings he always speaks last because he doesn't want to influence other people. Yeah, but just to touch on your startups, I think you started your first startup just a couple of years out of university. So I just wanted to ask, what gave you the courage to take the risk? And do you think that maybe, particularly in the UK compared to the US, young people aren't taking enough risks?
Oh, I mean, there's studies that show that young people aren't taking enough risks. They don't do drugs or have sex anymore. Like, it sounds so boring to be young now. But I don't know enough about that. So I would, firstly, I've got to say, like, my career history is one of being in the right place at the right time, like 100%. Like, I have worked hard, I think, but like working hard is maybe only half of it. Like, I've just been incredibly lucky. So I was on my director of studies at college, chap called Ian Pratt, started the Zen hypervisor project with some of his peers at the university, and spun out a company called ZenSource out of the computer lab, and I went and joined that company, right? And so, if I hadn't chosen to go to that college, like, I never would have got that opportunity to join, what at the time was one of the most successful tech startups in the UK, right? ZenSource sold to Citrix for like 500 million, I think. Like, I could be slightly wrong, but it was like one of the biggest exits. I mean, this was 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And that was what gave me the kind of, I wouldn't call it courage. Like, part of starting a startup is deluding yourself into thinking it's going to be easy. Like, and I definitely fell for that. Like, you have to, it's like, it's how some of my friends who have children have described having children. Like, eventually you forget how hard the first one was and you want a second one, right? Like, you know, if you remembered how hard the first one was, you would never start another company, right? Like, so yeah, like, I was in the right place at the right time. I worked for an incredibly exciting tech startup that was, you know, pretty successful, and thought, hell, you know, I could have a go at this. This seems easy. And I was obviously very wrong. It was incredibly difficult. Like, my first startup was not a huge success, but I learned a hell of a lot, right? I learned, you know, I mean, the Tom from the Akunu days is a very different Tom to now. Like, back in the Akunu days, I wasn't as trusting as I am now. Like, I wanted everyone in the office, like, so I could keep an eye on them. Right? We were not a remote first culture. We did open source, but not in the same way Grafana Labs does. We were open source in name only. Like, there was no community, there was no collaboration, there was no enablement, there was no, you know, there was no adoption of our open source technology. And like, I learned a lot of very hard lessons. Now, I wouldn't change anything for the world, to be very clear. Like, sometimes you need those hard lessons. And like, you then also definitely needed some time off to recover afterwards. Like, I went and spent a couple of years at Google. That was like going back to university, learning how to build large SaaS systems. I was a site reliability manager. So learning, you know, really the trades that I've been kind of trading on ever since, in terms of like monitoring, observability, config management, all these kind of things, like how to really build large SaaS software that's, you know, multi-tenanted and so on. And took some time off. You know, everyone should take some time off in their late 20s, in my opinion. You know, I learned to brew, made my own beer, got into 3D printing, did, like, you know, developed a load of hobbies, and like, life's too short to not have hobbies. So, like, you know, took about a year off to just spend some time, you know, developing that side of my life. And then went to work for another startup. Friend of mine started a company called Weaveworks, and I ended up working for him for a couple of years. And then finally kind of got the itch to do it again myself. Right. And, you know, had ideas, had ambition again, had recovered enough from the Akunu days, and started Kausal. But Kausal, David and I only ran Kausal for 9 months before we got bought by Grafana Labs. Like, we got on really well with the Grafana Labs team and founders. We had so much in common in terms of the kind of company we were trying to build, the technology and the problems we were trying to solve. And you know, decided, you know, we would be better off joining forces. And I think, you know, I feel vindicated in that decision, because Grafana Labs has grown from 25 people to 1,300 people in the 7 years since. Like, it's been a hell of a journey. And I definitely, like, Kausal would never have been that successul if it hadn't joined Grafana Labs, for sure. I mean, Grafana Labs probably would have been that successful if Kausal hadn't joined, but who knows? Like, it's not for me to say.
I think observability is a really interesting idea, because, like, I'm really fascinated by this idea of data visualization, because if you look back to the Romans, for example, they had hundreds of years where they barely developed mathematics, and people speculate the reason is the Roman numerals were a really bad method of representation. Yeah. They couldn't do anything other than addition, subtraction. And so obviously data visualization is super important, but how do you decide what visual you should use in Grafana, and also early in Kausal?
Yeah, the thing to understand about Grafana Labs, we do a lot more than just Grafana, right? So Grafana is a relatively unopinionated visualization platform that can display anything to anyone, right? You know, you can connect Grafana to 200 different data sources, like, you know, anything from kind of, you can connect Grafana to GitHub's APIs, right? And visualize stats from GitHub or any SQL database, or obviously any observability system, you know, and visualize all of these systems, queries against these systems in, you know, pretty much any way. Like, it's incredibly flexible and unopinionated. So I guess with the Grafana hat on, just to answer that question, is we don't, right? Like, the Grafana project doesn't express opinions about how you should be interacting with your data. The rest of Grafana Labs, though, like, you know, Grafana is about 150 engineers. Like, you know, the other 400 engineers at Grafana Labs do have opinions, right? It's much more observability specific. And we do have, like, a set of best practices on, you know, for instance, there's these kind of observability philosophies about what you should be observing. right? And so like Brendan Gregg's use method, there's the red method as well. Like let's say like, you know, if you're monitoring a system, you know, composed of individual pieces of hardware, like you should be using the use method and looking at like the utilization rate, utilization, saturation, and error rate of these pieces of hardware. If you're observing like a microservice architecture, you might use the red method, the request rate, error rate, and the duration of requests. Or like Google would call it like the 4 golden signals and include saturation in there. Like, so there is you know, a set of best practices around observability. And then of course, like our Kubernetes monitoring solution obviously does way more than that, right? Like it's very much like, we run all our software on Kubernetes. We are experts on monitoring Kubernetes. And we think these are the signals that you need to know about the health of your cluster and of the applications running on your cluster. It is hard. You know, we've developed about 100 different integrations into Grafana. These are distinct from the data sources that are more about kind of, here's a set of curated dashboards and alerts for MySQL or for, you know, Oracle or for, I mean, you name it, Docker. They're just every common piece of software. We've got a monitoring integration for it. And that's been a bit tricky, especially if we don't use that software ourselves. Like we don't necessarily know what the right signals to observe are and what the right visualizations to place into dashboards are. And what we've done there is we've worked with partners or we've worked with the community, right? So a lot of these integrations are open source, sitting in Git repos, and the wider community of people who are experts in these systems collaborate with us. And our role there is really more to facilitate the collaboration, to curate it into something that's usable by the end community, and not necessarily to be the experts on what the right things to monitor about RabbitMQ are, for instance.
Yeah.
Just to get a quick one on AI, because I know you wrote a Forbes article about the role that AI has with observability and how it enables more people to engage in these platforms. Could you just elaborate on that? And what do you see the upside being for companies and for users of that with AI and things like that?
It wouldn't be 2025 if we didn't talk about AI, would it?
Absolutely.
So, you know, obviously there's been huge leaps and bounds in the last couple of years with this generative AI technology. I mean, we've had an AI team at Grafana Labs for 4 or 5 years now, doing various different techniques, right? One of the early days were focused more on the numeric techniques of like, you know, predictive metrics would, you know, give it any PromQL query and would tell you what the values are going to be in the future with certain confidence bounds. This is great for like predictive alerting around like, especially around kind of diurnal patterns of query load on your website. For instance, you can tell the difference between it being 4 a.m. in the morning, no one's on your website because everyone's asleep, or 4 a.m. in the morning, no one's on your website because your load balancer is broken. But like, you know, that's table stakes for observability platforms, honestly. Like the new kind of generative AI and the assistance that you can build with that. I think we're still trying to prove that this can be useful. And there's still a certain amount of hesitancy from our target. You know, our target audience at Grafana Labs is the practitioners, the SRE, the DevOps practitioners, the engineers using our software. And I think they're slowly coming around to the idea that these assistants can be useful, despite like, you know, false positives and so on. But there's definitely in that group some apprehension. What we have found though is like, we build this knowledge graph, we call it asserts, on top of all of your telemetry signals. And this is like a graph of entities and relationships of everything in your platform. Like we have found that feeding that into an LLM and interfacing you know, generative AI into that has made it much more accurate, much more useful, and especially to perhaps not to the grassroots practitioners, but maybe to the next level up, to the people who aren't experts in these systems, that don't know PromQL, that don't know the system that they're trying to debug, as well as perhaps the person that wrote it, and want some help, right? And that's something we're particularly keen on for the next year or so, is like bringing a lot of that technology to market and showing that, like, you know, managers or TPMs or other people can start to interact with the system and interrogate it and ask questions and have an agent really understand what's going on and have a conversation with that agent about it. Like a good example we've got is like, you know, we've had examples using our technology where some of our internal teams have been like debugging incidents using our assistant. And like, because the assistant is connected into your Grafana on-call rotations and to your all your Grafana dashboards and the asserts knowledge graph, you know, it can start to say, oh, it looks like the problem's in this service over here, and so is on call for that service right now. You know, do you want to go and contact that person? And that's kind of when you start to see these connected experiences that are a bit of a breakthrough, right? And really do breed some really interesting use cases. It's still early days. I am not an expert on this. Like I'm trying to get as kind of up to speed as everyone else. And we've seen huge adoption of AI coding tools. Like almost everyone in Grafana Labs is using OpenAI and Cursor to build the software. And like, yeah, we're huge fans of these kind of things, and we're really excited for where it's going to go in the next year. It does seem like in the past 3 to 6 months, like something's changed, like, and the pace of improvement, not just in the models, but in understanding of how to use these models to interact with other systems has taken a big step change. Like, and they're becoming useful not just in demos, but actually in real life.
Why do you think that your company in particular, Grafana, is very fast to adopt AI? Why your developers very quickly like on the ball with AI versus other tech companies?
I'm not sure we are very fast to adopt it. I mean, it's an existential risk, right? The companies that are the quickest to adopt these tools and use them productively will probably disrupt the ones that aren't. And we, 2 years ago, took a very kind of risk tolerant approach where appropriate to using these AI tools, when everyone was kind of saying like, oh, well, there's all these problems with them. We were like, look, as long as you're within these relatively simple and minimal safeguards, just go wild, right? Encouraging our engineers to use them. And that's why we saw like such really good adoption of GitHub Copilot, for instance, in Grafana Labs. However, what is kind of interesting is that's actually worked somewhat to our detriment. Like I think we were a relatively early adopter of the early tools, and like almost all the engineers in Grafana Labs are using them. But some of the more recent innovations in AI, we've been slower to adopt because the early tools are accessible, easy, they're there, they're paid for, they're integrated into our dev workflows. And the newer tools aren't. And the newer tools are really the ones that are delivering, bigger improvements. And so it's kind of a question that I'm grappling with right now is like, to what extent should we be placing our bets, like, and investing in these tools? Because like we did, a year, 18 months ago, invest in a bunch of tools and clearly made, clearly they're not the best tools to have anymore, right? And so and the bets you place as a large organization tend to be multi-year bets, not, I'll buy it for the next 6 months. And so it's kind of this interesting challenge of like, we moved quickly, I believe, at the beginning, did a good job, but actually that's meant like, I think in this market, at least as a user and adopter, there's almost a second mover advantage, right? Of like waiting a little bit and seeing which tools do emerge as the leader. And then I just like, even, I mentioned Cursor a few times just because like it's the one that's super popular right now, and I'm using it at home to do the Home Assistant stuff. I struggle, I'm a huge fan, but I struggle to believe like VS Code and GitHub and Microsoft aren't going to catch up. Like, and so if we do a huge investment in them right now, are we going to be in a similar position a year later where we're, everyone's using the wrong tool again? Like, but obviously waiting and seeing for too long is clearly the wrong choice as well. Like it's a big dilemma. And also like, obviously I run engineering at Grafana Labs, but like we have huge adoption of AI tools elsewhere. Like our marketing team has been a huge user of AI. We've got an AI assistant on our website that you can go and talk to, and it will been trained on our docs and all sorts of things like that, right? And our sales team, honestly, one of the biggest productivity improvements has been all of these automatic note takers in meetings. Like every single one of our meetings has an automatic note taker, transcribes the meeting, LLM summarizes it and sends it to everyone. And that's freed up, like we, as an async org, like all our meetings would always have a note taker, and that used to be a person that would sit there. We rotate it. We didn't want it to be the same person every time. We'd rotate it and we'd all collaborate on taking notes. But now that person doesn't have to do that anymore and can, take part in the conversation more readily. And the conversations, we can kind of forget that someone's taking notes, but rely on the fact that these AIs are doing it. That for us, like we use Gong a lot. Gong is a sales tool which, records our sales meetings and sends around summaries afterwards. And as a training tool, but also to do things like market research, to see how often in sales calls like competitors are mentioned, has been just huge, right? That's, I think, as an organization outside of engineering, where we've seen some of the biggest productivity improvements. Like, it's that's been massive. So much so that we're actually adding a similar set of capabilities to our on-call tool, right? If you declare an incident and it sets up an incident bridge, be a Grafana bot will join it and record the incident bridge and summarize it and add the notes to the incident. And obviously all of that feeds into the generation of a post-mortem, an incident report afterwards. Like, and again, all of this powered by LLMs and so on. Like, so yeah, like we're huge fans of that way of working.
Just to finish off, you know, on your YouTube channel, you've highlighted many different interesting use cases of Grafana. Is there anything that you're particularly excited about? I know your use in going to space, which is so exciting, and things like that.
JAXA, yeah, that was cool. Yeah, and SpaceX, I believe, uses as well, and a whole bunch of like the smaller space companies uses. I mean, this is why I'm so excited about the future of Grafana Labs as a company. Is 100% we are focused on observability as a commercial organization, but our open source projects are used way wider than observability, right? Like we have customers using them in the IoT space. Like there was a talk a few years ago at GrafanaCon by a customer, or sorry, not, I don't think they were a customer, a user who is growing strawberries in shipping containers, hydroponically in shipping containers in the middle of Paris. And their whole like HVAC and environmental system was all visualized in Grafana, and they came and gave a talk. And I was just fascinated by that. Like I like strawberries, but like I just thought it was a really good use case. And like we also see a lot of companies adopting Grafana as a kind of replacement for a more traditional like BI and analytics stack, like Grafana and ClickHouse and DBT as a like end-to-end open source analytics stack is like becoming really popular as well. And so right, you know, as a commercial entity, we're focused on observability and will be for a lot longer. And there's so much more depth to observability, and we don't want to spread ourselves too thinly. But at the same time, when we're done with observability, if that ever happens, like the opportunities for us in IoT space, in the BI space, in the security space, in so many other spaces are huge, right? And like I look forward to like tackling those problems in a few years' time of like how do we take the technology, the open source technology that's already used popularly in those spaces and build a business around them.
Yeah, I think Grafana is just really cool that you can tie it to any source of data and do stuff with it. So if anyone wants to learn more about you or Grafana, where should they go?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously check out our website, but one of the things, as a remote first organization in like 50 different countries, we run a really intensive events program. So like no matter where you are, there'll probably be an opportunity to attend a meetup or a conference or something where you can actually get face-to-face time with Grafana engineers and people in the Grafana team. So go on our website and you'll find these events. And that's honestly one of the things I love. Like we have a London Grafana meetup. It's actually the same day as the Open UK meetup. But like I often just turn up to the Grafana London meetup and chat to our users and our customers there. And it's the same in most major cities around the world, to be honest. So I'm going to actually going to Japan in a few weeks' time to do a conference there as well. We're doing our first kind of Grafana conference in Japan in February. Like, and we're always like trying to get in front of our users and our customers. So yeah, by all means, like go to our website, join a webinar, sign up for Grafana Cloud, try it out, talk to our sales team, but also go take part in one of these events, meet some of the team. It's a fascinating way and a really engaging way to talk to people from Grafana Labs.
Awesome, thank you. And we're excited to see you in a couple of weeks too.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like and subscribe to WaffleByte. You can find out more about Tom, Grafana, and the upcoming Open UK meetup through the QR code on screen or the links in the description down below. Bye.